Greetings, everybody. This is the night of April 27th through 28th, and I am going to start this video by telling you, this is the first of my core philosophies series, which are long-form explanations of the world that we live in today, other than the that are not readings from my paper or from some other piece of relevant literature, but are just my own thoughts. This one is something that I wrote almost a year ago, and I intended to show it to y'all, but we were busy, even building up enough of a house around us that I can be warm, let alone enough that it would look good. And then by the time I would have gotten the time, I both had school, and I was also concerned that if I made my videos too quickly, that a lot of people would listen to part of them and not to the whole message, and that if they believed in something too much, I was just concerned for a lot of reasons that he would win the election, which, again, was something that I couldn't live with. And, well, it happened anyway. I said nothing and it happened anyway. So, I may as well start. This is part 5 of that series. I'm going to arrange it as such as I add more of them. But this was the one that I had a full script written out for. And it's a pretty lavish thing. I'm not going to have the luxury of doing that for most of them. But this is something that I'm happy to do just for this one. I'm happy. And this is quite a story and quite a message. I think you'll all love it. So, chapter 5 of the episode 5, MAGA is a cruel joke. Let it begin. So I'm going to start by telling you a story from my own past and my own life. And I think that it's something that's rare among opponents of the current self-proclaimed president that we have. I think it's rare among current opponents of him to really be able to understand and empathize so much and have sympathy for people that voted for him. But that's exactly me, and I think it's a useful thing to have. Our movement's gonna have to contain some of those people if we're gonna make any kind of majority that is tamper-proof. And man, I don't doubt they're gonna try to do that. We're gonna need some of those people. And so empathy is a good thing to have for them. So, when I was 10 years old, which was an election year, this was the 2016 election, I was the kind of person who would have been a perfect mark for Trûmp. And as far as the Christian supporters of this self-proclaimed president now, he was for a while. I'm not saying he was never the president. It was what he did that disqualified him. But I was a perfect, as far as the way that fellow believers like me, which is the majority of the people that support him, got radicalized. I was the perfect mark. Like, I was somebody that, in my learning about the world around me, the industrial world, the roads that linked it together, the technologies that it had and has, our technology for getting energy, the progress of renewables. I kept on seeing this singular decade of the 1950s, the 1950s, the 1950s. Anything that was inventive, that was bizarre, that was trying something new, anything that required a lot of effort or money from the government or any kind of public support and solidarity. It was all the same. It was all the 1950s. And it was something that I noticed. And I knew, and a lot of this was from reading Wikipedia, which is an amazing resource that I'm grateful for, that helped me out so much when I was little. And I knew from a lot of the stories that existed from that time as well, that it was a great time to be a child, at least if you were white. It was a great time to be a child. You didn't have to worry about going anywhere else. You didn't have to worry about the family breaking up. You didn't have to worry the kinds of quarrels that exist now, mostly over things that are addictive, substances, and other stuff that's addictive. Just didn't really exist back then. And it was like paradise, from what I heard about it. And I fully understood that it was not the same for everybody. But for white people, I saw that it was paradise in many ways. And it was a place that I wanted the blessings of that time to be available to all. And I'm sure that's what most of us want. I don't think that most people, even in this current fascist, lawless madness, I don't think that most people, even there, are self-consciously racist, which is absolutely bizarre that even the fascists themselves are self-conscious about their racism, and they're like, I want to at least pretend that I'm not racist. That is absolutely bizarre, but it's true, and it's a good sign about what this country might be like if we manage to survive this. So, I was an NPR listener at this time as well. And did I tell you that we were a family that was on the fringes? Yeah. Yeah, we were. And my mother was a social conservative in a lot of ways, but she was all about leftism and environmentalism and the working people. And we were independent recyclers. She was all about workers' rights. And we were we were following the Bernie Sanders campaign primarily, and he had a lot of promise, and he had his best campaign, in my opinion, because he learned a lot of the wrong lessons from it. His best campaign was his first one in 2016. He appealed to people that disagreed with him on guns, that were pro-life. He appealed to people, all kinds of people. People that were socially conservative in other ways. He did not cast people out over those divisive social issues. And I'm not going to say that they're not real problems. They're huge problems, but they're divisive. And part of the reason why they're such a problem is because they're divisive. And I do think they were the greatest thing to ever happen to a lot of the very wealthy in this country. So, I would hear the things that Trump would say, coming back to him, and his slogan, MAGA, which is Make America Great Again, which frankly he had no right to copyright. I think that whoever the next president is should sue him for the right to use that term, because he had no right to copyright it. That is a blatantly common term that is common English language. That is not something that you have the right to trademark. That is not creative. That is just common English. But I heard about this slogan, and it was absolutely crazy making, because he was on the Republican ticket, which at that point, this was after the Tea Party, being on the Republican ticket at all was not a great time, not a great sign at that point. And this was a party that had a history of, this was a party that had a history of of lowering taxes on the rich, of cutting all kinds of essential government services, of downright suicidal when it comes to the environment, believes in economic things that just aren't true. And this was the party that was in many ways the problem. I'm not saying that the Democrats were perfect by any means. There's a reason why I left them back then. I left my party at 10 years old. I did like Bernie Sanders, but I had a distaste already for them because of the social liberalism, and because they didn't do anything about all of the social problems that we had. They didn't want to do anything about them. But it was absolutely crazy making, because he was on the Republican ticket. He had a history of scamming working people, and the things that he said about women were horrible, and it was like, why would anybody vote for him? He is the problem. He is the thing that's making us not great. America is not great right now because of people like Donald Trump. Because of people that are greedy, people that commit fraud, people that are addicted to sex and things like that, and are not willing to get help or even try to do better. And I have a loving heart for many of those people, but if you're not even trying, then, well, you might be a little bit like Donald Trump in that respect. He was a sex addict, I'm sure. And I'd feel more bad for him. I would feel for him more if that was one of his only problems, but he has so many of them. I have to kind of numb myself to it. I would be ready to forgive him, by the way, if he were to ever change. But it's not very likely at all. He never talked about unions. He would never talk about family values either. People just assumed that that's what he meant, I guess. And the strength of the devotion to him suggests that this has to be about social issues. That's the only thing that I can imagine this phenomenon being about. But he said that he would make this country great again. And very little of what he talked about was what made the 50s great. He talked about trade and immigration, and yes, free trade is a huge problem in this country. It's used as a means of arbitrage. It's used by companies that feel like they're above the law. They can be above the law as long as they can afford to go to another country to get their operations overseas, take a plane out and make a deal somewhere else and do what they do. And I wonder where Trump got the idea to do his El Salvador thing. It's what American business has been doing for years, flying beyond the reach of our laws. So, trade is a huge problem, but immigration, these are people, is not at all, really. These are people, especially not in America, these are people that are very similar to the people that already live here. I would say that they're often better than us because they haven't been as exposed to our culture. They are less likely to be addicted to stuff, and they treat their children better, and they're better in a lot of ways. Even if they weren't, we're called to love them anyway, unconditionally. Love the poor and the immigrant and the refugee. But these people are better than us in a lot of ways. They're not the problem at all. The American working class, frankly, has more to blame by betraying each other and by treating each other badly than these immigrants have. But it was absolutely crazy making, and he would talk about those issues in a very adversarial way of these countries are ripping us off. I suppose that they're enabling our companies to do that. They're enabling the lawlessness. But there's a lot of people at home that are in on this, though. Remember that. He would talk about immigration and say that countries are sending their worst here. Have you ever met an immigrant? Really? So, this was all fairly absurd. Again, I went off script here. Immigration wouldn't be a big deal in a country that had a strong economy where the surplus labor was able to go to work, nor would trade deficits exist without companies that think that they're above the law. And so this crazy making stuff, I understand it now a little bit more. I'll get to it later. it's a feature, not a bug. Like, the whole point of it, in many ways, is to haze and to get you to be loyal and to trust him. But it's something that luckily I didn't fall for, because I had wise people in my life that warned me against this guy. So I did this thought experiment for several years, and it lasted until I was 14 years old, where I would imagine myself as a Trump supporter, because it very easily could have happened. I was one of his perfect marks. It came naturally to me, for the same reason it came to a lot of his rural supporters. I was a perfect mark in another way, too, which is I didn't know Trump in the past. I never watched The Apprentice. I didn't know about his escapades until Access Hollywood, and the way that he the way that he was a sex addict, I would say, and inactive addiction, the way that he was abusive to women. I did not remember him at all. He was a blank slate for me, Donald Trump. It was the main red flag for me was the fact that he ran as a Republican at all. And even though he was saying that things that would belong in the Democratic Party. And a lot of these people, they didn't know Trump either. They were too busy to watch reality TV. They were too busy to learn about him in the 1980s. They might be in their 50s or 60s back then, because early on it was a lot of boomers. Now it's more Gen X and Gen Z that are supporting, Generation Z that are supporting Donald Trump. But it was a lot of boomers back then. But they didn't know him for other reasons, because they're regular, hard-working people from the countryside that don't concern themselves with the kinds of petty BS that Trump was involved in. So, like, none of us knew the context. And I'm speaking on behalf of people that did end up supporting Trump, by the way, which is not quite perfect yet. I don't know a lot of them that have escaped the cult. I know a few, but very few of us knew how rotten of a person Trump was until we already distrusted the media, because he told us to distrust the media. And we remember the scandals, and we remember how corrupt it was, and stuff like that. And he knew how corrupt the media was. He wrote it to the White House. But none of us knew the context until he had already poisoned us against mainstream media. So, as something new would happen over time, something new that Trump did, I would wonder to myself, if I was a Trump supporter, would this make me snap or not? And even by Lafayette Square, which is the moment, in my opinion, where he became the worst president in American history, because that was the moment that he tried to make a mockery out of the Constitution by breaking up a peaceful protest. This was so authoritarian, and yet I still doubted that that would have been what made me let go of him. And we were all so demoralized, we didn't even value our democracy particularly. This is something that I wrote before the election, by the way. We were all so demoralized that we didn't even value our democracy anymore. We just wanted the pain to stop. But what made me snap the big thing that made me snap, which was small by comparison, but it was a big deal for me because it was a betrayal of MAGA instead of the Constitution, and MAGA was something that I cherished more. Fellow Trump supporters, not that I was one, but fellow Trump supporters, and our interests was something that and our hopes and dreams was something that I cherished more back then than I cherished even the Constitution. It was when he terminated AFFH, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, which was an organization that pushed for affordable starter homes and ADUs to allow them to be built in existing neighborhoods, which is a threat to property values. Like, property values? Whose property values? This was shocking to me. Whose property values? Clinton's property values? Whose suburban lifestyle dream? This is his words. Clinton's? Like, this was such a profound betrayal of a huge aspect of what MAGA was supposed to be. And this was a great aspect of what the 50s was like. Was that the housing was cheap. It was $50,000 to $100,000 all over the country in today's money. He had betrayed us before, but he had never done it so shamelessly. It was like he was trying to appeal to rich people at the cost of his own voters, his own base, the people that loved him. Like, this is something that would have made me snap. But again, not everybody is as curious as me, and not everybody is as free-thinking as me, and even I would have taken 4 years. But that would have been the end. And that was right before the 2020 election. And certainly January 6th would have done it. But, and I don't know, Lafayette Square didn't, so maybe it wouldn't. But that was a pretty bizarre day for me, actually. I might tell you about that. I may have told you about that already in one of my previous episodes that is coming up, if you're watching this a couple months from now. But I may have told you about that in one of my explanations of the past 60 years or so, modern history. But this would have snapped me. This moment. It definitely would have. And he did promise, by the way, that he would lower the price of housing in this election, because he's a scum that lies every time he opens his mouth. And again, I would wish that he would be better, but that's what he is right now. He's a scumbag, I would say. He's a scammer and a con artist. Remember when I said that this vagueness was a feature, not a bug? This is why. If people thought clearly for themselves, which I did because I was a free-thinking person, what MAGA meant, they would not have voted for Trump. If they thought about how much they hated the pornographic magazines and the awful debaucherous stuff and the drugs that ripped their families apart, they would not vote for a man who admitted to groping women sexually during his trash TV career. If they thought about how they wanted fact-based local journalism like what we had in the 1950s, they would not vote for a creature of reality TV. If they thought about how they wanted unions and affordable housing back, they would not vote for a New York City slumlord who spent a career defrauding tenants and employees alike. It's like how Joel Osteen almost, and the prosperity gospel people, almost never preach about Jesus because they know that if people know the hard truths, they're not going to think that they can just donate money to his church in exchange for blessings like a vending machine. Trump was a symptom of problems that I talked about earlier on in this playlist. If you're watching this a couple months from now. Problems that I talked about in my paper as well. He seized on the hopes of MAGA sympathizers and supporters like me, because the two-party system had made people like us, Christian Democrats, people that want law and order, people that want a government that is strong and vigorous, that can protect the American people. The two-party system had made us unable to express our grievances. I know from personal experience that it's basically unbearable to know what you want and have nobody to advocate for it. I had to live that way because I wasn't able to vote for or support or campaign for, because I couldn't have voted back then, but I could have campaigned for him. I was unable to do that too much for Trump. I had his number very quickly, but I wanted to be in the MAGA movement, and it was so tragic. It was so painful, and it really took a number on my will to live. And I was suffering in a lot of ways back then. I mean, a year into his presidency, I was arrested for non-criminal reasons, and I was moved from my mother to my father, back to my father, who was cheating, who had cheated on her. But I had to live with him and pretend that nothing happened. But certainly having Trump in office didn't help. What these people had been doing for years and decades before 2016, a lot of them were Republicans, but some of them were former Democrats like me. A lot of MAGA people who voted for Trump were Democrats. There's a lot of MAGA Democrats out there. A lot of them vote Republican now because he's swept them up, but there were a lot of them for Obama voters, like 10. There's enough that enough percent that it was decisive, certainly, in his victory. What these people had been doing for decades was shutting down their hopes and dreams in order to be able to find comfort and home and solidarity in one of the two hypocritical political parties we had. And a lot of them were Republicans, but not all of them. And when Trump came along, they emotionally remembered the America that they really wanted. It looked much like their childhoods, or maybe before their childhoods, for a lot of them, Gen X kids, with perhaps less racism they might have wanted. They didn't remember it logically, and this is very unprocessed stuff for them, but they had the emotions there, and they were unable to appreciate the contradictions between hopes and dreams that they had been suppressing for decades, and the reality of who Trump was. They just wanted to believe in some kind of hope. I said before that these were desperate people. They were, I was. They were desperate. I was desperate. I'll talk about this in my own personal story. For a lot of my adolescence, I had narcissistic personality disorder. And the reason why I had it, it's a form of diet suicide. a form of watered down suicide. It's a way of, if you can't beat him, join him. It's a way of giving in to an unbearable reality and accepting an unbearable value system. Most of these people that are narcissistic, they would not have chosen to be that way when they were children. But they did it because they just couldn't imagine anything better. And so they gave up. They accepted values that were ugly and that were boorish and that they don't believe in themselves, frankly. Values that, when it's easy, they go against. They stand against. But when it's hard, they can't. Because that's how narcissism works. I'm sure a lot of narcissistic people. Trump is definitely towards the end of towards the callous end, even among narcissists. But I think a lot of them have consciences, and they want to be better, but they just don't know how to, because it's when it's hard. And I can totally understand why somebody who was weary and tired and in despair and had shoved their hopes and dreams down for such a long time in order to cope with the two-party system would want to cling to a man like Trump. And I think for many of these people, actual suicide would have been the alternative. That's not an approval of this man or his movement, and I wish I had been there to help them sooner. But that's how I think it is. And that's why I think he was able to win, or almost win, 3 times now. God bless you all. I will be seeing you again with another fireside tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Almost a week from now, unless some emergency happens and I need to update you. Sorry that I didn't do that last week when we had that, when he assumed absolute power, when he got that, when he thumbed his nose at the court. But I love you, and God bless you. We're going to need it in the coming months. This is our finest hour. That will be actual chapter 1 of this. I might do that next week or after I do my reading from my last reading from the paper. God bless you all. God bless you all. And God bless you. Bye. Love you.